Now let's talk Agenda 2063, where data gaps and low usage of readily available readily available data by decision makers is becoming quite an impairment when it comes to Africa achieving its vision or Agenda 2063, a 50-year development plan aimed at eradicating poverty and hunger, creation of decent and social protection, amongst others. And right now I'm joined by Jimmy Mbogo from the Foresight and Capacity Building Workshop that is currently ongoing to review challenges that have been faced by players in the continent, planning sector to be specific. Good afternoon, Jimmy.
Well, indeed, a very good afternoon to you too, Noah. Yes, as you rightfully said, we are following up the Africa Union Development Agency, and also we're also looking at other stakeholders from the National Treasury right here in Kenya. And this is one of the things that has stood out for us is the fact that there are data gaps. And from some of the interviews that we have had and some of the presentations that have been done, data is one of the key things that needs to be implemented in decision making in the country. And I am currently joined by that is PS Saitoti Torome as well as Dr. Gideon Nimako, and they will be speaking to us. Dr. Gideon Nimako, in fact, has just done a presentation on the same. PS, thank you so much for speaking to KTN. One of the things that we really want to understand from you and from where you sit at the National Treasury and Planning is how important is data when it comes to planning, and why aren't we seeing a lot more data being incorporated in decision making in this country?
Thank you very much for your question. Actually, data is very important at all the aspects of planning. In the first place, before you come up with a plan, either a national plan, a plan for sub-national, that is sub-national is actually the county integrated development plan, you require data. You have to know where are we with regard to data. For example, if you want to reduce poverty from maybe 36% of the household to 25%, you must know where you are at the moment. And for you to know where you are at the moment before you start coming up with a grand plan, you must collect the data and measure where you are. Then after collecting data, after using data for planning, you also now use data to monitor and evaluate whether you are implementing the plan. That is, you collect more data to see where you are after you adopted the plan which you are now implementing. So data is very important during the planning stage and also after planning for monitoring and evaluation.
But appears the other thing that has come out during the presentation is the disparity between African countries and the globe, for instance, that being countries in the Western world. And when you look at this, what does this say about Africa? There is growth, but there's still a very huge gap with regards to this growth.
And actually, you are right about that. That's why we call ourselves developing country. Yes, we have not reached where those developed countries are, but we are on course. And that is why we are coming up with so many programs, like, for example, Africa 2063, so that we can also be able to accelerate development and growth in Africa. And also, that is why we also have what we call the Agenda 2030 of United Nations, that is the Sustainable Development Goals, where we have the 17 goals. All those 17 goals cover all aspects of life. And if we incorporate Agenda 2063 and Sustainable Development Goals in our national planning, then definitely we shall be able to develop and reach where those countries are, because we shall be able to identify our challenges, we shall be able to come up with plans, and then we shall also be able to remove the obstacles which make it difficult for Africa to develop. And some of those obstacles are things like lack of inclusion. So for Africa to develop, we must include people both on political and economic institutions. Both our economic and political institutions must be inclusive. And that is why, for example, in Agenda 2063, Africa, there is a lot of emphasis on democracy, because democracy leads to inclusive political institutions. After having inclusive political institutions, we also need to come up with inclusive economic institutions. People must participate, the youth, the women, the small businesses. They must all be included in economic activity. There must be freedom to do trade. And that is why even in Africa, one way of even trying to bring more trade among African countries, we have what we call the regional economic integrations. Like we have one for the East African community, we have the SADC for Southern African countries, we have the ECOWAS for West African countries. So when we encourage more trade among Africans themselves, there will be development. We are even talking about the free trade area. So we have to remove all the obstacles, including infrastructural obstacles, which make it difficult for economic development to take place. So we agree, we are not like the Western countries, but we are developing, and our aim is even to reach where they are. So the issue is we continuously keep on planning and implement our program.
Two questions actually from me before I let you go is the issue of the thinking behind Agenda 2063. And I'm sure you were probably part of this conversation or preview to this conversation. What has led to this? And when you look back at the last 10 years, what are some of the key challenges that have stood out?
In fact, Agenda 2063, if I were to summarize it, it's about African solution to African problems. Because this adoption of Agenda 2063, it was adopted by Africa's heads of state. And they did, before that adoption, a lot of analysis was done. And the best thing, it is us, we Africans, who know our challenges. And we are the best people to come up with the solution of our own problems. So that is why we are pulling together. We bring all African countries together. We even share ideas through what we call the APRM, African Peer Review Mechanism. When we do all this, when we engage ourselves all this, we understand our problem more better, and we are the best people to come up with a solution to those problems.
All right. And again, to the second part of that question was, when you look back at the last 10 years, we've had COVID, we've had the Russia-Ukraine war, and other issues. For you, from where you sit, what has been the biggest hindrance to us achieving and implementing some of these issues that were agreed upon?
That is actually true. We have had challenges. The COVID, then we have the conflict in not only in Russia, Ukraine, even in Africa, we still have some areas that are not stable, like the Horn of Africa. You understand very well the challenges in the Horn of Africa. So because of all those, as we plan, when you plan, you don't anticipate those things, but you have to adapt to your plan. The environment changes when you are implementing your plan. So, and the best thing, how do you deal with those problems?
All right, thank you so much, Bona PS. And Noah, as I earlier on indicated, this is a 10-year implementation program. Out of every 10 year, those involved in this program will come together and review what has been done. And now I want to indulge Dr. Gideon Namako. Dr. Thank you so much for speaking to KTN. One of the things that we really want to understand, when you look back at the last 10 years, what are some of the challenges that have stood out for you from a data perspective?
So the issue of data, although it's a challenge, it provides opportunity for learning. And hence that is why we have this workshop and many other workshops that we having to capacitate member states, all right, and to train our technical officials as to how to handle data and to close the data gap. There's a saying that if you don't measure, then you can improve. And so the data gap, although it's not peculiar to Africa, globally, data governance is still an issue. I would just want to latch on what the PS was saying. If you look at Africa, how Africa recovered from COVID-19, it actually did well, more than even the advanced countries. It tells you that there's resilience in our economy. The problem is we need to tell the story with real data and train our technical officials as to how to harness this knowledge from our resilience system.
Do you feel that African countries are doing enough or are doing as what is required of them?
I think they are doing a lot. Enough may be an overstatement, but they are doing a lot. There is always room for improvement. If you look at economic growth, there are areas where we need improvement. If we also look at issues of institutional capacities and arrangement, these are two main areas that we will need growth. But overall, countries are progressing. So you can see the trajectory that countries are progressing. There is need for improvement in terms of accelerating, because the Agenda 2063 is a 50-year plan. So the first 10-year plan is actually a medium-term plan to see what we have done so far in the next 10 years and are we on track. A lot of our countries are on track, but there is room for improvement.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen, and thank you for speaking to KTN. Noah, I will hand it over back to you so that we may be able to give our viewers a more detailed report in our subsequent bulletins. But for now, back to you.